Thanks for being here. Thanks to Fondation Valérie for kindly sponsoring this very first Climate Robotics Summit. So with that, I'd like to also take a few minutes now to just help frame our discussions on climate robotics some more, and really to call out a few points that will also weave through many of our sessions during the next 2 days. And maybe just first for context, so you know where I am coming from and my own biases. I'm the founder of the Climate Robotics Network and an entrepreneur in residence at EPFL, which is the Swiss Institute of Technology here in Lausanne. I happen to come from the humanitarian space, and specifically Humanitarian Tech, where I had the opportunity to design and operationally deploy a wide range of humanitarian tech for some 10 plus years. And I started getting interested in the climate tech space about 5 or so years ago, starting to work on some smaller climate tech projects. I then got the opportunity to incubate a climate tech startup, and then very happy to be a climate-based fellow as well. So, existential question maybe, but why are we here at this summit? I imagine we all actually have different reasons, and I'd really love to know what your reasons are. I think we come from so many different walks of life, but we clearly have a shared interest here, and I'd love to know where you are coming from with respect to this particular summit. So feel free to share just a few words or more in the chat. I'd love to read them out in a couple of minutes, just to give you some time if you want to chime in. Now, if I were to ask myself why I'm here, I would say that we have learned a heck of a lot in the humanitarian space about how not to design and deploy emerging tech for humanitarian action. We have seen firsthand the harm that some deployments of humanitarian technologies have caused. And yes, those technologies do include robotics. And I really don't want to see some of these same mistakes play out all over again. And this is actually, in part, why I launched the Climate Robotics Network. I'm also here because I am convinced that robotics does have a positive role to play in climate action. However, I also believe that there are more bad, harmful, and pointless ways, even wasteful ways, to use robotics in climate action than there are good, positive, and meaningful ways. This has also been true of the humanitarian tech space, and I'm seeing the same thing in the climate tech space. So just also out of curiosity on this particular topic, what examples have you come across in the climate robotics space? And real examples like climate robotics in action. What examples out there have you come across that you find the most compelling? And likewise, equally importantly, which kinds of applications do you find questionable? So there again, please feel free to add this kind of input in the chat throughout the summit, and I'll tell you a bit more why that's so important. These are the kinds of questions that we really need to ask ourselves to really better understand both the opportunities and, of course, all the limitations of climate robotics. And we need to ask these, but of course, many other questions to collectively build the evidence base, along with all the do's and don'ts on how we design and deploy climate robotics. And we need to document all the failures as well. Otherwise, where's the learning, right? And this is where your input now and throughout the summit is, and after, is going to be so important, right? We've been working on this climate robotics white paper, and also this global map that you'll find on the website. And here we really would value your input from all different disciplines, your feedback on this draft. It's currently deliberately only a working draft at this point, because we realize we do need a lot of input. So please do take the time, open invitation, make corrections. I'm sure we've gotten things wrong. I'm sure we've got gaps. Help us fill those gaps and share your feedback. And of course, feel free to also add to the global map as well. Now, why am I personally convinced that robotics will have an increasingly important role to play in climate action? I do try to ask myself that objectively as often as I can. And when I ask myself that question, it's like, well, listen, we already have many powerful and proven climate tech solutions, right? Like solar panels, right? Maybe not sounding as sexy as some of the other technologies out there in climate tech, but but solar panels are incredibly powerful. Now, the thing is, we also need to manufacture, deploy, and recycle hundreds of millions of new solar panels in the coming decades to decarbonize our industries. And frankly, the fact of the matter is that manual deployments simply don't scale, which means that many of our most powerful climate tech solutions are actually not that scalable without some level of automation. And what's more, in certain industries, in some countries, these industries are facing labor shortages. So there's simply no labor surplus available to actually accelerate, even manually, the deployment of climate tech solutions. So this is why I'm here. And I'm also here at the summit because I want to support the most promising founders and climate robotics solutions out there to help amplify their good work, your good work, and to connect them to strategic partners and funding opportunities. And the same goes for researchers and students out there as well. Now, why? Why do I care about this? Because their success is ultimately our success. If they can move the needle on climate action. So this is another reason for the Climate Robotics Network to serve as a springboard for the most promising solutions out there and the most promising research out there. Equally importantly, and I'm going to come back to this quite a bit throughout the summit, I also want to ensure that we don't waste time and resources developing and deploying climate robotics solutions that make no sense. And let's be realistic. Climate robotics faces many challenges. And this is not a criticism. This is not a criticism of any research, of any climate robotics startup. This is a call to action, a call for us to all come together and figure it out. Figure out how to overcome some of these challenges responsibly, ethically, as well as inclusively. And here's the good news. We have tons of insights to draw on from the humanitarian tech space and beyond. So we're not actually starting from scratch when we're tackling many of these challenges. It may feel like they're all new, but they're not. And it's really up to us to really bring those learnings from other spaces into the climate tech space. Now, let me give some concrete examples of some of these challenges. And as I do, again, please feel free to weigh in the Zoom chat with the biggest challenges that you see in the climate robotics space. So again, we're really keen to include your input into the final white paper. One concern that I have about climate robotics and any technology really, is that there is no such thing as a purely technical problem as soon as you take robotics out of the lab and bring robotics into society. By definition, therefore, this means that the solutions themselves cannot just be technical solutions alone. In fact, when we try and solve problems and take a technical approach, that often is a great recipe for causing harm. So solutions must be social, they must be local, they must be inclusive, they must be plural, they must be diverse. And to this end, we've also learned from 10 plus years in the humanitarian action space and humanitarian tech that foreign-led, top-down, and technocentric deployments are rarely impactful, rarely sustainable. So we need to work with local partners, with local experts, with the ones who actually have the lived experience, who are most directly impacted, to ensure that they are directly involved in the decision-making and in the deployment of climate robotics solutions. We also need to be aware of power dynamics. And by power here, I mean authority, control, and influence. We need to be aware of power dynamics at play in international deployments, such as with experts and organizations in more resource-constrained environment. We need to act responsibly to counter these power asymmetries. Now, you may ask why, and that's a great question. First, in my opinion, it's a basic ethical responsibility. Second, it'll make your project more effective and sustainable. And third, as we've learned in the humanitarian space, these power asymmetries will ultimately undermine your work, guaranteed. Now, again, the good news is that we can use the inclusive and locally led models from the humanitarian space to ensure ethical, sustainable, and locally led action in climate tech. And that's just one reason, why we need inclusive climate robotics. I want to call attention to two other challenges, cost and environmental impact, before wrapping up. It's true, the cost of robotics is plummeting in many countries, but this is far from universal. The cost of climate robotics solutions is a massive barrier to widespread adoption in the rest of the world, not least in resource-constrained environments, i.e. in those very countries that are hardest hit by the climate crisis. So this is why I'm a big advocate of minimalism in robotics. As my colleague Ali Niles puts it, minimalism is more than just an aesthetic. It's a design lens for sustainability. Just because we're working in climate action does not give us carte blanche to expand our carbon footprints. A minimalist approach to climate robotics means figuring out the absolute minimum amount of energy, materials, communications, and other resources that are needed to deploy climate robotic solutions. A minimalism approach means fewer moving parts, which means a more robust and more affordable solution, and also a more locally repairable solution, which also means a more sustainable solution. WALL-E is an excellent example of this. And yes, WALL-E, Disney's lovable little robot that takes on the repetitive and hazardous job of cleaning up the planet. Now, thanks to WALL-E's modular design, it can use secondhand spare parts, and that actually gives WALL-E a lifetime of 700 plus years. And at night, WALL-E goes into hibernation mode to conserve energy. During the daytime, WALL-E uses AI for automatic path planning to maximize efficiency. WALL-E even uses solar panels to recharge. Now, these are some of the design priorities that we should be following when building climate robotics. In closing, WALL-E also illustrates that the power of robotics is not only in collecting data, i.e. in sensing the world to identify different types of trash in the case of WALL-E, right? That's what he does. The power of robotics also lies in the ability to act on that world simultaneously, right? So WALL-E acts on its environment by physically collecting, sorting, and compressing trash for recycling purposes. So it's actually doing something about the problem than just sensing it alone. Climate is physical. We've been physically destroying our climate for way too long, and now we need to reverse those physical changes as quickly and responsibly as possible. We need to act on our environment at scale, not just manually, but with enough automation and responsible automation to move the needle. That's why we need climate robotics. So let's get on with it. There's no doubt that our discussions during the next 2 days will generate even more questions and ideas. So please do consider this as the start of the conversation. That's yet another reason for the Climate Robotics Network to provide continuity as we build this evidence base. So please, you've just seen the link here on Zoom. Join us on Slack and let's continue and build on these conversations post-summit. We're happy to organize webinars with you, team up on white papers and research, support you in organizing your own climate robotics workshops and more. What we really want then is for the network to serve as a platform to help you do what you're most passionate about. So please join us on Slack. Let us know what you're up to and how we can help. On that note, we also have a dedicated LinkedIn page that we're keen to use to amplify your good work. So please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. Tag us as often as you'd like so we can repost your good work.